Well, Dennis, the PM, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition were all out on the hustings today. We're told Scott Morrison will spend much of the week in Western Sydney, where he'll hammer home his economic recovery messaging and focusing, of course, on small business, core constituency for the coalition. I think COVID is well and truly in the rear vision mirror. It feels very much like a campaign. The PM's claiming underdog status too. Latest news poll show the coalition trailing Labor. A little bit of movement though, now within striking distance, although I have to say I want a 4 in front of that primary vote before I get comfortable. What's your assessment?
Yes, well, you did right there, Peter. A primary vote without a 4 in front of it for either the coalition or the Labor Party is not going to see them elected in their own right. So at the moment, both the major parties are below that critical 40% level. Now, what's happening with the coalition? There was a slight improvement, but again, we've seen with all of the national news polling, what's happened here is that as the Conservative independent parties lose some support, the coalitions goes up. As the Greens lose some support, then the Labor Party goes up. So it's still out at the fringes. What we have is, yes, there's a campaign on. There's no doubt that it will go all the way through to next year and probably to May. In fact, just about an hour ago, the final deadline for a December election passed. There can be no election this year under the Constitution and the electoral laws. So we know this campaign is going to go all the way through to May. Anthony Albanese's been out there on the hustings while Scott Morrison's been in quarantine and overseas. Anthony Albanese's been out there on the seats, endorsing candidates on the ground. And what Labor people are telling me is that at this stage, the election is extremely hard to read because all the states, they say, are like different countries. And within the states, there are different regional metropolitan fights as well as electorate by electorate differences. I don't think we've seen an election like this for decades. Truly, it will be very difficult to know the outcome, but Labor has to win 8, 9, maybe 10 seats to win in its own right. It can't do that on 38% of the primary vote, and at the same time, the coalition has to win 3 seats net to actually hold government, and it can't do that on 37%. So at the moment, neither party's in a position on the national polling to win the election in their own right, which we assume will be May next year. So what's going to count between now and then is what happens in the individual electorates and whether Scott Morrison can convince people. I mean, obviously he's the underdog. As he said when he was asked about it, he said, well, fairly obviously, at 53-47, he's the underdog on a two-party preferred basis. So it's all going to be about on-the-ground campaigning, electorate by electorate, and from Scott Morrison's point of view, the longer it goes, the better, and the more he can talk about the economy. The COVID pandemic has been a success for the government. Yes, there have been problems, undoubtedly, and the states have had problems, but overall, Scott Morrison can go into next year campaigning on the basis that Australia will have one of the best records in the world on COVID vaccination, the low number of deaths and economic recovery. And that's what he's going to be talking about all the way through.
Give me a sense of how the machines are prepared, because of course people talk about the incumbency benefit of government, and absolutely it is there. There's about 530 staff available to the coalition or any government party. There's less than 100 available to opposition. But of course, when you're in government, you've got to run the country as well as, get ready for your next campaign. In opposition, your only job is to get out of opposition. So Labor hasn't been constrained by all the COVID issues. They've been able to just get ready for the campaign, do their policy work, etc. I'm told, particularly in, say, New South Wales, there are a lot of gettable, winnable seats for the coalition where they have not pre-selected candidates. How ready is Labor to go, and how ready is the coalition?
Well, I think this is a very important point, and that for the Liberal Party particularly, which doesn't have a federal body, it's run effectively by the states in the states. And what we are seeing in Western Australia, of course, the Liberal Party has been reduced to a rump. It is the junior partner in the coalition of opposition in Western Australia. In Victoria, the Liberal branch is separated, it's fractured. In New South Wales, it's not doing too badly, but there are still divisions. And I think what we really see is that only Tasmania and, say, South Australia, from a Liberal point of view, are well prepared on the ground. And Anthony Albanese has been able to use all that time. Scott Morrison's been overseas. He's been out there talking and endorsing candidates. We saw Scott Morrison today in the crucial seat of Lindsay, Liberal-held seat in Western Sydney. That was a bellwether seat for John Howard, and it will be for Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese. But Anthony Albanese's been out there before. He's been out there in Western Sydney, and I think that at the moment you'd have to say Labor's ahead on the ground, but there's still probably 6 months to the election.
Well, Lindsay's a good one to pick out. That's Penrith Way for those outside of Sydney. It was a bellwether 2 for Tony Abbott. He won that seat, and then it was lost by Malcolm Turnbull, and then it was brought back into the coalition ranks by Scott Morrison. So it's one I will watch very closely on election night. Just quickly before we go, COP26, the politicians and the leaders had long left. It was the bureaucrats and the billionaires sitting down nutting out this communique. This whole debate about phasing out coal, it was changed now to a pledge not to phase it out, but to, I think I'll get the word in a minute, to phase it out. No, phase it down.
Phase down.
Phase down as opposed to phase out. Thank you, Dennis. Mind escaped me there for a moment. A lot of pressure, though, still on the Prime Minister to change that to 2030, 2035 target, despite saying he won't. He's got pressure from people like Joseph Linsky, Dave Sharma in Sydney. Surely, having now got net zero, the more they keep going over this ground, the more it's going to upset people in the National Party camp and potentially even Conservatives.
Yes, well, I think two things here. For a start, Boris Johnson was trying to put lipstick on a pig. I mean, the COP26 was a failure. It was a fizzer. Everything was watered down. India and China ensured, rather than the death knell of coal, as Boris Johnson suggested, this use of the word unabated coal power, financing for unabated coal, was the same formula Japan used at the G20. Unabated coal power simply means virtually all modern power where there are various measures taken, including carbon capture, to actually abate the emissions. So it's not the end of coal power at all. And India, Japan, Australia, Indonesia, all of these countries, South Africa, still want to continue with the need for coal. That's going to continue. Boris Johnson, that was sheer empty rhetoric. What Scott Morrison faces now is, and I can guarantee he's not going to change the 2030 target. That was one of the fundamental issues that the National Party insisted on, and it is one of those where he can try and jam Labor by saying, we have our targets, we're not going to shift them, we will actually achieve them, unlike so many other countries. And, by the way, if he goes to the election on that platform and he is elected, he will then have a mandate not to change those targets all the way through the next government. So he is on very firm ground trying to force Anthony Albanese, who says, yes, we need higher targets, and whether they will legislate for those targets. This is the new climate war. It's not about net zero in 2050. It's what the targets will be in 2030 and whether they are legislated. Because if they are legislated, there'll be real changes made by 2030.